Hello, this is Keir from XenForo. In a previous video we looked at setting up a Windows machine with a development environment and the necessary server software to run XenForo or any other PHP application for that matter. And today we're going to be doing the same for a Mac. There's a few changes from the configuration we used in Windows, the first of which being that the majority of our installation is going to be done through the command line in a terminal rather than using a pre-packaged system like Laragon. But the payoff is that we're going to end up with a very powerful development system with a special feature being that you can target any particular version of PHP that you like without having to switch the entire system to use a particular version globally. So we'll talk more about that later on. Now, I've got a few prerequisites set up here that you will want to do the same if you're going to follow along. I've installed the Xdebug toggle into Safari, which I've grabbed from the Mac App Store. This is just a little helper for debugging with Xdebug, and it just produces that little gadget up at the top there. I've also downloaded and installed a copy of Microsoft Visual Studio Code because it's a great editor and we can extend it into an even better IDE with some extensions. And I've got TablePlus, which is my database management tool of choice. It has a great free version, and if you pay for a license, it opens up even more functionality. So that's a strong recommendation for me on that one. Now let's take a look at what we need to get started. We're actually going to be basing this installation on Homebrew, which is a package manager for macOS, and it has a nice benefit in that it takes a lot of stuff that is difficult to install by itself and wraps up all the installers into a nice unified command line interface, and then it installs all of its stuff into a single directory tree so that in the event that it doesn't come up to scratch or you don't like it, it's easy to get rid of it without having spewed its stuff all over the rest of your system. But to use Homebrew, we do need to have the Xcode command line tools installed. I have already installed them on this machine, so I'm not going to run that command because it's just going to show me an error. But if you run this command in a terminal, then it will open a dialog and walk you through the process, and it may or may not get you to reboot afterwards. So then we're going to move on to the actual Homebrew installation. Oh, I should note, if you do install the Xcode command line tools, you may find that they stop working after you run a major macOS update, say from 11.0 to 11.2, and you may need to reinstall them. But it's just that one command there. You don't need to worry about anything that follows. So let's get on with installing Homebrew. Okay, I've opened up Visual Studio Code and I'm going to get a terminal up and running inside here so that I can run the installation and configure Visual Studio Code at the same time. The first thing we need to do is to install Homebrew. Now, this is not going to take very much time on my demo here because I have actually already installed it and it has downloaded the necessary packages. So it's going to look like it's much faster. You may well find that this is going to be a bit slower when you do it. But we'll just run that. It'll ask you for your root password, and then it will tell you where it's going to install. This is an Intel-based Macintosh, so it's going to install into user local. But if you're using an Apple Silicon-based Mac, I believe it's going to install into /opt/homebrew or something similar. But if you are using an M1 or whatever comes later Mac, then just bear in mind that your user local path will change to something else. So let's hit continue or return to let that do its stuff, and off it goes. Now, in the meantime, while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to get Visual Studio Code configured. So this is going to be pretty much the same as I did on my Windows tutorial. So let's start off by heading to settings and changing the two settings that I like. I want the debug toolbar to be docked, and I want to autosave files when I change focus. So autosave on focus change. That just means that if I change my focus away from the active window, which has a dirty unsaved file, then it's going to update that for me. Right, now I want to go to my extensions, and the first thing to do is I'm going to find the built-in PHP. Oh dear, there we are. And I'm going to get rid of language features, disable that. Then I'm going to find the extensions I do want, which is PHP IntelliFence and PHP debug. Then I want Visual Studio VS Code IntelliCode, and I want the SQL tools for MySQL and MariaDB. And because we're going to be doing some configuration of the server here, I want editing tools for ini files and for conf files, Apache conf. That's all done. And then while we're configuring, let's do two more things. First of all, I'm going to press Command Shift P to open the, let's get rid of that because I don't think it works in there. Command Shift P to open this command browser, and I'm going to type path, which will allow me to install code into the system path. We'll find out what that's all about later on, but it's very useful. And finally, I'm going to add a debug configuration ready for later on. So I'm just going to say add configuration, and oh, I don't have a folder yet. Okay, we'll do that later. No problem. Okay, that's all ready. Let's get the terminal back up because as you can see, Homebrew is done. So now we're going to run this command here, or this three commands actually. First of all, we're going to tell Homebrew that it has two additional sources for packages, and then we're going to install all the packages that we want in one big command. The command is usually brew install and then a package name, or brew install and a list of package names. So let's set those off. And as I said just now, I have installed and then uninstalled for the purposes of this demo. So this should go a lot quicker than it would if I was actually downloading them live. So let's have a quick talk about the packages as they go through. So first of all, we're installing the package config, which is just a bit of software that helps to build other software. Then we're installing MariaDB, which is a fork of MySQL, and we're going to be using that instead of the official MySQL server. Then we've got imagick, which is an image manipulation tool that we're going to build into PHP, and XenForo can use that optionally. httpd is the Apache web server. Mailhog is a really nice tool. It allows you to test your mail sending capabilities of your software without actually sending any email. It will essentially trap any outgoing email so that you don't have to set up any sort of you don't have to disable mail on your systems, so it doesn't accidentally email people. You can just trap all of the outgoing mail and view it as if it's in a special inbox. And then we've got Elasticsearch, which is the engine behind XenForo Enhanced Search. And finally, 3 versions of PHP. We've got version 5.6, 7.4, and 8.0. And the commands that are done here will grab the latest versions of each of those. So that's all done. And now we need to actually configure the packages that are installed in addition into each version of PHP. Now, I mentioned that there are multiple versions, so there's a couple of little tweaks we need to make to get this to work. The way that Homebrew is going to work with multiple versions is that it sets one kind of master version by linking it into the main command path. And right now, because PHP 8 was the last one to be installed, that is the one that's linked. So if I were to type php-v in here, user local bin php-v, it will tell me that it is version 8.02. So using that command, we don't actually have access to version 7.4 or 5.6, but we can switch the entire global version of PHP by using an unlink and a relink for the specific version. We also need to do that in order to install packages for those versions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unlink the current PHP and then link PHP 5.6 so that that becomes the active version. Install Xdebug version 2.5.5, which is the latest version that PHP 5.6 can support, and install imagick. So let's just run those. This will take a little while. So here we go. Lots and lots of output here while it builds this stuff using PHPIs and the various magic that Peggle installers do. And once that's done, then it will add a line of configuration to the PHP 5.6 ini file, which we are actually going to need to remove afterwards. So that was Xdebug done. It's doing imagick now, and we'll just wait for that to finish. That's done. Let's do PHP 7.4. I'm doing these one at a time just in case I see any errors go by. I'm not expecting them to, but just occasionally you might find one. So now we're unlinking PHP 5.6 and linking PHP 7.4. So currently 7.4 is the active PHP version. Sometimes it's worth using those commands. So even though these won't have an effect for the most part on your web server version of PHP, you may need to run a particular version of PHP on the command line, and in order to do that you would need to do this brew unlink PHP and then brew link with a force on the particular version that you want to use on the command line. Looks like PHP 7.4 is done, and again it's enabled imagick and Xdebug in php.ini, so we're going to need to go and remove those. Now, for PHP 8, I happen to know that at the time that I'm recording this, imagick does not work with PHP 8, so I'm not going to run that last part of the command because I know it's not going to work. So let's just run that, but I'm leaving the command in the document because who knows, by the time you run this command, it might be working. So it might be worth a try. It's not going to do any harm if it fails. This should be the last bit of installation we need to do, and after this we will move on to configuring and setting everything up. That's it, all done. So now let's start getting stuff working. The first thing we need to do is MariaDB before we start to edit actual configuration files. So let's start the MariaDB server, because in order to configure it we have to have it running. So that is brew services start and then the name of the service, MariaDB. This command not only starts the server, but it also adds a launch daemon to the Mac operating system so that MariaDB will start up when we reboot the system. There we go. It's just grabbed hold of the launch command, and now we need to run these two commands, this one and this one, to actually configure the server for our use. So first of all, this one, and that doesn't require any user input, and then the second one, which will require a little bit of user input. Right, now this script will tell you that you don't have to set a root password, but as far as I can tell, you absolutely do. So the current root password is nothing, so we'll just leave that. We don't want to switch to Unix socket. We do want to switch to the to change the root password. I'm just going to use root and root. I don't want to remove anonymous users. I don't want to disallow root login remotely. I don't want to remove the test database, and I do want to reload the privilege tables. That's it. MariaDB is up and running. Let's just take a quick look to see that it's there. Open up TablePlus, create a new connection. It's MariaDB, create. I'm going to call it local MySQL, and then the host is localhost, the port is 3306, the username is root, the password is root. Don't think I typed that right, root. Let's test that. All looks good. Let's save it, and then I can open it up, and here is TablePlus. Let's click on the database gadget to see the list of databases. There they are. Let's open one up, and we can see the data that's in there, which is not very interesting at the moment, but at least we know that it's working. So now let's move on to actual configuration of our server software. Now I'm actually going to be editing the config for all of this stuff right here in Visual Studio Code because it's a great editor, and who would want to mess around on the command line when you've got an editor like this? So I'm going to go to the Explorer view and open a folder. I'm going to head right to the root of the system, and then I'm going to show hidden files, which is Command Shift full stop period dot, whichever you want to call it, and I want to open user, local, etc., and then hit open, and you'll then see the complete tree of the contents of the user, local, etc. Directory, which is where Homebrew keeps its config, opened up in the side here. I'm also going to save a workspace at this point so that I can come back to this at any point. So file, save workspace as, and then I'm going to save homebrew config.code workspace into my home directory so that I can bring that back at any point. The nice thing about saving a workspace with Visual Studio Code is that at any point I can bring up that workspace, and it will remember exactly where I was in terms of the files I had open, the directories I had expanded, the state of all of the panels. It's great. So having done that, let's go and edit the Apache config, which is stored in user, local, etc. httpd. First of all, we'll edit the httpd.conf. Now, for the most part, I want to avoid editing much of the default config because I want to know exactly where my custom stuff is. So all I'm going to do here is come to the bottom of the file there and add this line here, which is going to tell Apache that I want to include a separate configuration file, and that's where I'm going to put my stuff. So I'm going to have a new file in the extra directory, and I'm going to call it httpd-dev.conf, and into that I'm going to put the whole of this lot here. Let's copy that. Now I'm using my own username, and you're going to need to use your own username. So in this file, you'll see that there are, if I double click that, you'll see that it highlights 3 instances of my username. My username is Keir on this particular system, and yours will need to be whatever your actual username, not your display name, your username is. If you don't know what your username is, open a terminal and type who am I, and it will tell you that your username is, in my case, Keir. So having grabbed that and changed these as necessary, let's take a quick look down here and see what the configuration says. It says that we're going to run Apache as me. We're going to listen on port 80, which is the default for HTTP. The server name is going to be called localhost. These are the Apache modules we want to enable that aren't enabled by default in the Apache configuration. And then we're going to tell it that its directory index is files called index. So if we come to a directory that contains index.html or index.php, it will show the contents of that file rather than a directory listing. And then finally, we're going to put all of our useful stuff into a single virtual host that it's going to catch everything. And that virtual host is going to serve its files out of the www folder I'm going to create inside the documents folder. So let's go and do that right now and just create a new folder called www there. Now, there are some bonuses and some caveats to doing what I'm doing here. By putting the www folder inside my documents folder, which is a system protected folder, it's reserved in some way by relatively recent versions of macOS, we are going to get some permission dialogues coming up asking if we're sure that various bits of software should have access to my documents directory, and the answer is yes. And the reason I'm putting it there is because if you have your documents and desktop and something else being backed up automatically to iCloud, then that's an automatic backup of your www folder too. So we've set all that up, and we'll talk a little bit more about this handler later on. So that's Apache done. Now let's move on to PHP. So there are 2 stages to editing PHP, one of which is the global PHP config, and then we're going to talk about the config for the way we're running PHP in the web server, which is using the fastCGI FPM system. So let's close up the HTTPD stuff and open up PHP. Now, if you recall, I noted earlier that the installation for Xdebug and ImageMagick was going to put directives into the main PHP.ini files. I don't want that, so I've opened up the PHP.ini for PHP 5.6. I'm going to select those two lines that it's added at the top and then do command / to comment them out. And I'm going to do that for each version of PHP that we've got here, because I do not want those directives in there at all. But those are the only changes we're going to make to the main PHP.ini files. Now we're going to go and add some additional configuration in the conf.d folders for each of these versions. So in conf.d, I'm going to add a new file, and I'm going to call it php dev.ini. And the contents of that for PHP 5.6 is this. I'm just going to copy and paste the whole lot in there and save it. Now I want to do something similar for PHP 7.4. But this time I want a different content for the file like this. Difference being that PHP 5.6 can't use Xdebug version 3, so it has to use an older version with a different way of configuring. So this is Xdebug 2 configuration, this is Xdebug 3 configuration. We'll save that out. I am using a non-standard Xdebug port. By default, Xdebug version 3 uses port 9003, but because I want my IDE here to respond to Xdebug, regardless of the version, I'm just going to force them all to use port 9000. And finally, into conf.d for PHP 8, php dev.ini. Open that up, paste the same thing, but because I know that ImageMagick is not installed, not working, I'm just going to comment that out for now. If you saw success messages when you tried to install ImageMagick, then leave that enabled. Otherwise, copy what I'm doing. Okay, next up, as I said, we need to configure the PHP FPM installation. So I'm going to go into PHP 5.6 again, and particular to PHP 5.6, I need to add a little bit of extra code to the default php fpm.conf. So I'm just going to come into here and then get to the bottom of the file and add one extra line to tell it to pull in my custom config. There we go. And now I'm going to go in, I'm going to create a directory in here called php fpm.d, and within that I'm going to create a new file called x.conf. The reason I'm calling it x.conf is because these files are parsed in alphabetical order, and if we take a look in the php fpm.d directory that already exists for PHP 7.4, you can see that there's already a www.conf file. I'm not really interested in the contents of that because I want to overwrite some of the directives in there, but in order to have my config overwrite that, it needs to be parsed afterwards, which is why I'm calling it x, because x follows w in the alphabet. So back up here, x.conf, all I need is these three lines. Now, the username is your Mac username again, and then we need to tell it which port to listen to. And this is where it gets interesting, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the three different versions of PHP listen on different ports so that we can target them individually. And the way I'm setting these ports is I'm taking the version number of PHP, in this case 5.6, I'm removing the decimal place and turning it into an integer and then adding that to 9000. So PHP 5.6 becomes port 9056. Let's save that out. Now let's do the same in here. Let's have x.conf in there, paste it in, but this is PHP 7.4, so on 9074. And let's just copy that file and paste it into here. And this is PHP 8, so it's 9080. Okay, that seems pretty good. So now we need to go and start up our services. So the services we need to start are Elasticsearch. I'll do this one individually first of all. And then the three versions of PHP and the Apache web server. Let's run all of those in one go. And we should see success messages for each of those. That all looks good. Okay, let's go and take a look to see if we've actually got a working server. Now, if you recall, I added code to the system path earlier, and that means that I can do this. This is telling me, the system to open a copy of Visual Studio Code targeting the www directory, or at least it would be if documents www. Wonderful. Now, like I said earlier, you're going to get a variety of permission prompts asking if software has access to your documents folder. In each case, say yes. These are annoying initially, but once each piece of software has touched the directory once, it won't bug you again. So here we are in the www directory. I'm going to create a file called test.php, and then in that I'm just going to write echo hello world. You have to excuse my horrifically arthritic typing. That's just the way it is at the moment. So localhost / test.php. Now we see that the PHP FPM software is asking for permission to access the documents folder. Yes, it can have it, and there we are. We see hello world, not echo hello world. PHP is running. This is great. So the next thing we need to do is to see how to work this fabled multiple PHP version stuff. So if you grab hold of this little bit of code here, it's going to download a zip, and we'll allow that. It'll save that into my downloads, and it's got this info folder. So open up my www stuff, and I'm just going to copy the info thingy into there. Now, you might notice that it automatically updates Visual Studio Code with the contents there. And what I've got is inside the info folder, I've got an index document that is currently going to just be a set of iframes. And within each of the 3 iframes, we open up the info file from each of these directories. So let's just take a look at that and see what we get. So we'll head over to info. htaccess would like to access. Yes, thank you. Right, here we are. So we've got 3 different directories all showing PHP info, and right now they all show PHP version 8.02. This is the PHP 8 directory, this is the 7.4 directory, and this is the 5.6 directory. How do we get them to use different versions? Well, that's quite easy, really. All we have to do is come into here and notice that I've put an htaccess file into each of those, but at the moment there's no active directives. If I open that up, you'll see that I've got this set handler call. Now you may recall that when we worked with the Apache config, I said that there was a handler for PHP in there. Now this is where we use our specific port. So if I uncomment that and say that now the handler for that is the fast CGI handler listening on port 9056, that will target PHP 5.6. And likewise, if I do this for PHP 7.4 and tell it that any files within that folder that are PHP should target 90, oh, I opened the wrong one, there we go, 9074, that's got it. Then when I refresh this, we should find that without any kind of switching, we'll see PHP 8, PHP 7, and PHP 5.6. Moment of truth. Yes, this is PHP FPM 7 asking for access, and then that's PHP 5 asking for access. It'll take a moment for them to wake up. I think this is Xdebug doing an initial config for itself, because after this they will load very quickly. We'll just wait a moment for those. There we go. PHP 8, PHP 7 and PHP 5.6 all running simultaneously and targeted with a simple htaccess file. It's as simple as that. Let's look at debugging next. So here's a very quick demo of debugging. I did a slightly more in-depth investigation into step debugging in the Windows tutorial, so I will leave a link for that in the description for this video. But just to show you how this works, let's just do a little bit of work in this test script. Let's have foo equals 1 and bar equals 10 and result equals, and 1 is a terrible number to work with, 2 and result equals foo times bar. Notice that it is suggesting the variables because of the PHP IntelliSense that we've turned on. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a breakpoint in here and then go into my run configuration. Ah, yes, this is what I've forgotten earlier, wasn't it? We didn't have a folder ready, so now I need to add a configuration. And I need to add a configuration of PHP, which brings up this little config file. Port 9000 is all fine, so we'll hit add config. Oh, no, we don't want to do that. That's all fine. We'll just hit save. And what we should find now is that we are now going to get the ability to switch over to the debugger view, and we can tell it to start listening. As soon as it starts listening, with that listen for Xdebug profile, the status bar changes, and we can come back to here and get ready to debug. A breakpoint is going to allow execution to continue until it reaches a breakpoint, and then the breakpoint forces execution to pause, and we can inspect the code and the environment at the point that breakpoint happens. So let's debug that by turning on the toggle so that this will cause a debug session to start, and then we'll just refresh the page, and there we go, execution has stopped at that line there. And let's take a look at what we've got here. It knows what it's going to have, but all three of those are uninitialized. So let's skip over that line, and now we'll see that foo is set to 2, skip over again, and bar is set to 10. Now, in a traditional programming sense, you might echo out the result of result here to find out what it is, especially if it was a more complicated bit of code than just multiplying one variable by another. But if we step over that, then we can now see that the result is set to 20. So we can inspect the results of our code execution without having to edit the code or muck about with in any other way. So we're happy with that. Let's just allow it to continue, and off we go. Let's try something else. Let's put a breakpoint here and here. So now that's still toggled, so we'll hit refresh, and we can see that it's paused at that breakpoint. I'm not going to keep stepping through it. I'm just going to allow it to go on to the next breakpoint, and you can see it's done that, and then we'll let it continue. Next, let's install a copy of XenForo and do a slightly more advanced debug, and then I think we are basically done. The first thing we need to install XenForo is a database for it to live in. So let's head back to TablePlus, and we're going to open the database browser and say add, and we want, I'm going to call it XenForo 22x, and I'm going to set the encoding to UTF-8 MB4, and there we go. Let's open that up, and you can see it's opened a new tab with that database in it. Obviously there's no tables in it yet, but we're going to fill those up in just a moment. So I've got my www folder here, and over here I've got a copy of XenForo that I've downloaded. So let's open that up, and then I'm going to take the upload folder, and I didn't want to stick it into that directory, did I? I want to stick it into the www folder, and I'm going to rename that XF, and let's go and open it up. I'm going to turn off the debug mode for a moment and stop that listening just for the moment. Right, localhost /xf, which will get me to the beginning of the installation process. Begin installation, username is root, localhost server, username, password is root, and the database is the one that we just created, XenForo 22x. Save the config, and if we were to head over here, we'll see that it has automatically saved out a config.php with our values, so that's great. Now I'm not actually going to continue the installation here because I want to run it in the command line, which is faster. So let's get that running, And while I'm here, let's just save the WW workspace so that I can come back to it at any point. I'm going to put it in the documents folder, I guess, and let's call it www.workspace maybe. Okay, that's all done and saved, so I can now add configuration to the workspace specifically for my www configuration if I want to. So now let's bring up a new terminal, and you'll notice that the terminal will start up in the www directory, which is the directory for the workspace, which is great. Let's cd to xf and then run the install command, which is php command.php xf:install install. Let's hide the Explorer so that we've got a bit more room. And then I think we're going to largely accept the defaults here. Admin password is password example at example.com, and the board title is XenForo on Mac, and HTTP localhost is not quite right, is it? It's HTTP localhost/xf, and off it goes. Okay, here we are. I'm going to say that I do want to send anonymous statistics because it's really helpful, and I'd like you to do the same. And off we go. That's done. Let's go and take a look at the actual installation and see that we've got it all up and running properly. Localhost xf, there we go. Let's log in with the rubbish login that we gave it just now, and here we are. XenForo is up and running, and running perfectly. So now that we've got that installed, let's do a spot of debugging. So the debug example I'm going to try out is we're going to observe the input being fed in when we post a thread. So this post thread form is going to submit to the forum controller. So let's open up the xf directory, and then it's the public controller. So we'll scroll down to pub, and it's a controller, and we want the forum controller. Now, because this is an IDE, it understands our code. So rather than me having to scroll down all of this to find the appropriate bit, I can open the outline here. And what I want is, let's just minimize that down so that I can see that. And what I want is action post thread. So I can jump to that and get there straight away. You can also see all the stuff that's in scope within action post thread. But all I want to do now is put a breakpoint on this line here so that it will activate as soon as I get into action post thread. So let's take a look at it working. My new thread, and then let's have some text from somewhere. That will do, and we'll just paste that in here, and then I'm going to turn on the debugger and hit post thread, and it posted because I didn't have this listening. There's a lesson. So let's come back and do another thread. My second new thread, and we'll have probably better have some different text. Let's have this, and we'll come back to here, and this time I will remember to make it listen. So back to the debugger view, turn on the listener, and now it's ready. So let's hit post thread, just checking the listener, the tool is toggled on, the listener is ready. So when I hit post thread, then it jumps in, and we are activated. So here we are. We can see the local variables that are currently mostly uninitialized, but the parameters are here, and we can see that in params it has node ID 2. And then if we skip through, we've got the forum is now initialized. That's a forum entity, and we can inspect that and see all the stuff that's going on in there. And let's just take a look at what else we've got. If we, I know, let's just close up the locals and have a look at the super globals, because we know that we've submitted a bunch of stuff. So there's the title, and there's the message HTML that got submitted. So at this point, we can just allow it to continue and it will post the thread. And there we go. Now, while we were debugging, we could also have dug into any of those particular functions. So let's load up something else and dig into some functions. Let's actually just turn off that breakpoint there and then head straight for the main index, which is essentially a router to load the rest of the content for XenForo. There it is, and I'm going to put a breakpoint on xf start so that we can dig into that. So let's just head over to, well, anywhere really, and hit refresh. We are listening, and here we are. We've stopped at xf start. Now we could go to the debug view here and skip over that as we've been doing before, but we can also step into that, which will go down into the xf start function. And here we are in start, and we can start digging, start skipping through that. And if we wanted to have a look at what's in standardized environment, we can dig into that as well. Here it is. We ignore the user report, we set user limit, and various other stuff. This is not very interesting, so let's skip out of that rather than going through the whole thing. Let's skip over that one and go and take a look at start system. Here we are in start system, and that's largely uninteresting as well. So let's see where we go after that. Now we are outside of the start function, and we're having a look to see if we are matching the API calls where we're not. So we're going to go into run app. So let's dig into there, see where we are, and let's have a look at setup app, which would go into there. Now notice that I've timed out here. That's probably a bit of configuration that we'd need to figure out, so that it doesn't time out in the middle of a debugging session. But you can see that we can carry on debugging here, and we can dig in and step through the code as you would expect. So hopefully that's a decent inspection of what debugging looks like with a real application. At any point you can stop the listener by hitting the stop button. You can allow execution to continue until it reaches another breakpoint, or the execution terminates by hitting continue. And then we've got the step over, step into, and step out of functions that we've been using just now. So let's let that continue, and it won't actually do anything because the server has given up. But if we were to run that again and then just use the continue, then off it goes. So the last thing I want to show you on this little tour is working with TablePlus, seeing as we've installed that. So I'll bring TablePlus back up again, and you can see that unlike Visual Studio Code, which refreshes its content live, TablePlus will not refresh its content unless you specifically tell it to. So let's hit Command R to refresh, and we get a list of all the tables that XenForo has installed. So we just created some new threads, so let's go take a look at those. And let's go find those. XF thread. Here we go. And here is the data in those in that table. Here's the first one with thread ID 1. Now I can click on that, and you can either double click any of these fields to edit them, or if you've got this right panel open, then you can edit them here. Now I'm not going to suggest you actually do edit any of this XenForo data, because you might break some denormalized caching that is going on, but by and large this is just to show you that it's possible. One other thing that I would note, and we are going to change it despite what I've just said, is that with TablePlus you can make multiple edits to something. Let's just make some random edits on some of this stuff. That will all be fine. I'm just going to do those two, and you'll see that as I do that, any fields that have changed will highlight, and any tables that have changes will also highlight. And the reason that this is great is that you can edit multiple things without actually committing the changes. So none of this has changed at all at this point, until I tell it to commit the change by hitting Command S. So let's just get rid of these two lines. I don't know what that's all about. Goodbye. So these changes are pending, but they're not saved. But as soon as I hit Command S, then they will be committed, and all of the highlights will disappear. which is a really nice function because you can edit multiple tables and multiple lines all in one go. So for example, if you wanted to change the attribution of thread to a different user, then you'd not only need to update the post table, but also the thread table and potentially even the user table as well to update all the relevant counters. And you could do that all in one simple action and commit all of that data at the same time, so that at no point does the data disagree with itself. So now let's take a quick look at some other TablePlus tools. We already had a look at how to switch the database, but we can also run raw queries here. Select star from xf user, for example, and you can see that it's going to automatically suggest field names and things. Let's just run that, and yes, okay. And here it is. That's the data that matches this query. And you can see that that's opened a second tab, so that we haven't lost the context of what we were doing in the thread table. The free version is limited to 3 tabs, and if you open up another tab, it's going to tell you that you can't actually do that, so we'll say later for that. But you can get around that by just closing down the tab so you don't hit the limit. As I said, this is great software, and if you do find yourself using it, then just buy a license. Now we can switch over to the structure tab here, and from here you can see exactly how the table is built and the indexes that are there, and you can edit those in fairly straightforward fashion. So I think that's enough looking at TablePlus, although I could just show you the this little view here at the bottom of the view. If we turn that on, then whenever we run a query, it will actually show you what query it was that it ran. So there we are. Can be quite a nice learning tool if you're not particularly familiar with the actual goings on in the engine of MySQL. So let's turn that off again, and I think that largely concludes this setup. The ability to switch PHP versions is controlled, as we saw, by simply changing the htaccess file that belongs in a particular directory. So if we were to come back out of here and create a new directory for, let's say, XenForo 1.5, that is not going to run with PHP 8, so we'd just open the folder, and in the htaccess file we would add these lines, which would force any PHP scripts within that directory to run on PHP 5.6. It's as simple as that, and I hope this has been useful for you.